So again, to reiterate, this is actually a close-up now. These dates are taken from the accepted, what is now I think called the high chronology of Egyptian history. It used to be much longer. And then they began to realize some of these dynasties actually existed at the same time and overlapped. And then we saw last night in the Abydos king list, they skipped from the 17th dynasty. They do not include this dynasty. And they go back to the 11th dynasty. So they kind of skip out all of this period of time. And Ramses II, his father, did that timeline there. Now, last night we said that the last king of the 17th dynasty, Sennacherib II, went and during the 17th dynasty, the people called the Hyksos, we were talking about, lived in the land of Goshen, and they began to move down the Nile, and they began to get closer to the Fayum area where we looked at the Canal of Joseph exists. And so they began to expand outwards. And while we're here, I think this might be a good time. I want to show you a parallel in biblical history here that I had really never noticed here before, and others of you probably have noticed it. And but for me, I just like, oh yeah, well that makes a lot of sense. We know that God spoke to Jacob. Joseph trusted God in being able to interpret the dreams, but we don't really see real communication, direct communication with Joseph. But we definitely don't see this period in the Bible is kind of void. Basically, you get one sentence, and a Pharaoh arose that knew not Joseph. Well, there's a good period of time, even if this is 430 years, or even if it's shorter, it's going to be around 200-something years. And it's a period of silence. You have the same thing when you go to the end of the Old Testament, and when you have Zechariah, and then is it Malachi or Micah? I'm getting Malachi. And so when you get to the end of that period of time, there is silence. And then all of a sudden, John the Baptist comes. Now, look at it in terms of the people's viewpoint, not from what we know of the Bible. John the Baptist appears and he starts preaching, prepare ye the way, and he's preparing the way for the Messiah. And then Jesus comes performing miracles. Now, look again at this. So the patriarchs come into Egypt. If they indeed are the Hyksos, in the archaeology that they've done up in Goshen at Abaris, where it seems that was the capital or the main city of the Hyksos, what they found there, and they said, well, could these be Israelites? And some will say, well, they worship some of the Canaanite gods. Jacob, when he returned from Laban, didn't Rachel bring the gods, the Laban's gods, with her? Aren't there a couple times when they're told to put away the gods that are among them? What they found is the Hyksos and God really never gave them exact direction like he does at Mount Sinai when the law comes with Moses. And remember the verse that says, at times God winked at this ignorance. He allowed it. but he has something better and bigger prepared. Now, when Moses is at the burning bush, he asked, "Who are you? Who should I say sent me?" And God tells him, "The I am." And he seems unfamiliar with, he has some knowledge, it seems, of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but he seems quite unfamiliar. Who should I say sent me? And we tend to think that these characters would automatically know, but it's been several hundred years with any communication from God. When they go out into the wilderness, one of the first things that God does, the Passover begins their year. And they're in Egypt. I don't know if you knew this. I didn't find this out just a few years ago. The Egyptian calendar is really unusual. It has, the weeks are 10 days long. So you have 3 10-day weeks makes up a month. And because they don't have a winter, they cycle their calendar by the flooding of the Nile River, so they've got 3 growing seasons for different grains. Just as a little footnote, the staple drink for Egyptians is beer. And we don't read about beer in the New Testament, do we? Beer is their staple drink. Go to Babylon. The staple drink there is beer from grain. But within Palestine, you have vineyards and grapes, and they will inherit this when they conquer the land. Remember how large the grapes, the clusters of grapes are? I have photographs of grape clusters on one vine that you have to put a pole through. I mean, and it's just all grapes. And they do grow, they can grow that big. So the grapes aren't huge. It is the clusters of grapes that grow off of that. So anyway, getting back to when God prepares Moses to go to Pharaoh, and God tells Moses that he is going to bring a series of plagues that is going to show that he is the only God. These plagues are designed to go up to the Egyptian gods and show that these are not gods. And he's going to do this with a mighty hand. The events here are tremendous. And they make great movies. People like movies, but these events should leave you, if you're an Israelite, they should leave you with no doubt. And the Israelites did not suffer through any of these plagues like the Egyptians did if they followed what Moses told them to do. So going back to the Hyksos, the Israelites during this time period, and even though they become oppressed, are not model citizens. Even when they are in the land of Canaan with Jacob, Jacob tells his sons, you made me to stink among the people of Canaan because of their actions, when a few of the things that they did. So, I think we're stuck here. How about, is it me or? Okay. So you have the 40-year wilderness period. Now, if we're following this down here, when you get to this period of the 18th dynasty, there's what is called the Amarna period. There's a pharaoh named Akhenaten, and he actually changed his name to that. Aten is the end of his name, and that is what he calls the sun god. And he tries to form a one god worship. Now, there are some that said that he was in a tassel with the priest Amun. And so basically they got into a power struggle. And that's interesting because remember when Joseph was doing the grain? And if you recall there, the people came and they ran out of things to pay with, so they started paying with their land. So we see that Egyptians owned the land, the individuals owned land, but then he traded the land for grain to keep them alive for Pharaoh. It became Pharaoh's land. But what does it say? It says, but he bought not the land of the priest. And the priests contained their land. So the priests throughout Egypt have quite a bit of power still. And it seems that during the time of Akhenaten, so now they don't know if Akhenaten went to monotheism to worship one god because he got into a fight with the priest and he tried to put them out of business, or if there was some event like the Exodus that caused him to want to worship only one god. So that's been up for debate. But this Amarna period is what we want to look at because when Akhenaten becomes Pharaoh, he pretty much, as far as a diplomat or anything, he's not interested in anything outside of Egypt. And he's just interested in building his new capital. So you have Amenhotep III, and this is down in Thebes. And that is Akhenaten. That is his name when he takes the throne. Amen, A-M-E-N. He's named after that god. Then remember I showed you Queen Tia back there. So actually, these two. He is Amenhotep IV. Sorry. These two are the parents of Amenhotep IV, which becomes Akhenaten. And Tia is the one that had the royal seal back in the museum. And then he changes his name to Akhenaten and worships this god, and whereas they had been worshiping this god and various other gods before that. His queen, and a lot of times in Egypt, if people know a queen of Egypt, they know Nefertiti. She's known for her beauty and these things. And so Akhenaten takes the capital and moves it on the other side of the Nile River and names it Amarna. This is Akhenaten and Nefertiti with their children, and they have 3 daughters, and they're shown small here. But during this time, a lot changes with Egypt. And if you look at the art form, he looks pretty like he's slouched over. If you look at his face and his lips, it's different than what they did before. And there is a pose that all the other pharaohs before and then later on after will take and have their reliefs made of them in this pose, and it's with one of those iron mallets or maces, and they have their enemies by the hair ready to strike them. But he has nothing like that. He doesn't go to battle, and the images that you see of them, they're pretty relaxed during this time. So we talked last night about the Iqwar papyrus and compared how it parallels the Egyptian plagues. Okay, and we see the name that Ifware is no longer used. So here we go. So we got here the Amarna Letters, and this is one of them. So they have found 350 of these letters at this site at Amarna. And what happens to Amarna after King Tut dies, and then the vizier that rules a few years after him? There's a general that comes up that just hates Akhenaten. And because Tutankhamun is still tied to that, he then scrubs all their history and he buries Amarna. And when he did that, it preserved all of these letters. And if you notice here, they're not written in Egyptian hieroglyphs, but evidently the Egyptians knew how to read or had someone in their staff that could read cuneiform. These are from Canaanites. There are some from Assyria and then some from Babylon. And they're numbered. It's epistle is what the E stands for. A is Amarna, and then that's the number there. And that's how they number them. So in looking here at the land of Canaan, which is going to become the land of Israel, I want to go through and look at a few of these Amarna letters. And I had never heard of these things until I took a course in Egyptology. And I've taken several from different universities. And they just happen to mention it, and they don't go into them. But if you read them, and if you know what to look for, Gath. And Gath is going to end up being one of the 5 cities of the Philistines. And we read that when Joshua and they go into the land, they do come up against Philistines. And that so Philistines are there. And so this particular letter is from Gath. And I have here in the red, the word Akru. Okay? And so you have Akru, and then you're also going to see the same word with an H in front of it, which is Akru. When you look at Abraham's name in the Hebrew, and the word Hebrew doesn't really appear in the Old Testament that many times. And Abraham is called in Hebrew, and it means someone from beyond. Okay? Abaru and Taparu, one is Egyptian, one is Canaanite. I think I have the definition up here when we get going, but it means a wanderer. What did the children of Israel do when they left out of Egypt and crossed the Red Sea? They wandered, didn't they? They wandered 40 years. And it's kind of a little bit of a derogatory term, it seems, in looking at some of the definitions that I looked up. In this particular, you see the name here, Abedi Heba. If you look in the Easton's dictionary, it means servant of Heba. And Easton's dictionary says this is Adon-Zedek, of the king of Jerusalem, which the Israelites don't really conquer Jerusalem, but he brings out an army with 5 other kings and then ends up getting killed. He's one of the 5 kings that they put in the cave, and then Joshua comes and then kills them. His name is here in the Amarna Letters. The date, if you look on the chart, it's not quite lined up with Joshua, but as we go through here, you're going to see Abaru. In the Akkadian or Assyrian, they're described as rebels, outlaws, raiders, mercenaries, bowmen, servants, slaves, laborers. That kind of defines what the Israelites were during this time period, from moving from Canaan, dwelling in Goshen. They were, look at the terms of slaves. Well, they were slaves there at the end. They were servants. But then they also fought the Egyptians, it seems, that they are the Hyksos. In Egyptian, the Apru basically means the same thing: nomads, mercenaries, people who are not part of the Egyptian cultural society. And there is the Hebrew for that we see that Abraham is called the Ibri. And as you look here, Bob Breyer says this is what the Egyptians called the Hebrews. And he's an Egyptologist. He's the one that figured out about the embalming process. And Bob Breyer, I didn't think I was going to like his course, and I appreciated his honesty, because when he looked at the Bible, he said, hey, only the writer of Genesis and Exodus had intercultural knowledge of what went on in the royal courts and also in the priest temples. He's really impressed. So this is at Shechem, and as we look here, the king, and I've kind of abbreviated these letters so that they have a little bit more to them. The king sent a message about my son. I did not know he was consorting with the emperor, and herewith I hand him over to Adad. Now, this is an Egyptian ambassador. So, to keep the peace with the Pharaoh, he hands his son over because he was associating, evidently he was giving the Apru information about different cities, as that letter. Shechem, by the way, if you look here, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal is where they had the blessing that Joshua did. They had the blessing, and half of Israel stood on this side, and then half of Israel were on this mountain. And the blessings were read from here, and the curses, if they did not follow the law, were read from here. Jacob's well, or a well that he made, was in this general vicinity. Recently, they found, and that has already been excavated years ago, but they recently said that they found something up there, and they said they found some inscription that has the curse that was in the book of Joshua that they had to read up here. And if you want to go out on the internet, you can look. They did not invite a liberal archaeologist to come look at their material that they found and published. So all of the liberal archaeologists are crying foul that it's not good information. So I don't know at this point. This is the passage in Judges chapter 8 that talks about that he built an altar up there, and they discovered the altar when they did the original excavation. And so these things happen. He read all the words of the law and the blessings and the curses. And that's what we saw in the previous slide, which was that area of Shechem. Now, this chart, I didn't have this on here. This chart shows somebody took the time, and I'm working on one that's I think a little bit better than this, but somebody took the time and showed you each Amarna letter, and the ones that complain about the Apru or the Hebrews are here in red. And so all of these that are highlighted complain about the Apru are taking over the lands. Send us archers. And they'll say, send me 50 archers. Send me 100 archers. And it seems that they only ask for archers. They don't ask for chariots. They seem to be defending the fortifications of the cities, and that the Apru have already taken the countryside, and it's gone over to them. Sidon. And if you go back and look at the promised land and what it entailed, it was supposed to include Tyre, Sidon, all the way over to the Euphrates. So they fell quite short in what they were supposed to fully conquer. And so they had divided up the tribes in this area, and even Dan still had a problem. And so here at Sidon, the king of Sidon saying, all the cities that the king gave into my control have allied with the Habaru. And now these are things that we don't have in the scripture, so we don't know if this is, actually true. But it would seem plausible. What were the people, Jason, that came and they had moldy bread? Can't think of the Gibeonites. And they ended up allying with the Israelites. And you wonder, after Joshua passed, maybe they allowed, or they did that some more. We just don't know. So the king should give me into the control of the man who leads the king's regular troops in order to call reckoning to the cities that have allied. And so they see a problem here. Kadesh. And there's really two Kadeshes. It either could be this one, this far up, and I think there's another one, ancient city of Kadesh. And this individual, if it is this one up here, they somehow got the lands back from the Habaru. And he said, I restored the cities to my king from the Habaru out of service to him, and I made the Habaru go away. And we see the Israelites don't settle up in this area. Jerusalem. The king, the Lord, does not have a city ruler. Adonizedek dies. Joshua killed him. This person is, he's not the king. He is like an administrator. And so the king, they're writing to Pharaoh, they're writing to Akhenaten. And Akhenaten never answered any of these with the exception of one or two. And when he answered them, he was asking for them to send him some gifts. The king does not have lands. The Habaru have plundered the entirety of the king's lands. And this is someone writing in this area around Jerusalem. My clicker is a little bit out. This is Joshua chapter 10, where you see Adonizedek, the king of Jerusalem, and when he is killed, and the 5 kings of the Amorites and the king of Jerusalem, and they made war with Joshua and the children of Israel, and they overcome them. Now we go back to another letter here. All the city rulers are hostile towards me. I am treated like a Habaru. I do not visit the king. And he goes on here, and the king captured the land of Mitanni and the land of Cush, but now the Habaru are capturing the king's cities. There's not a single city ruler that belongs to the king, my Lord. And down here, Lachish, 10 miles away from Jerusalem, the servants allied with the Habaru and attacked the king of Lachish, or Lachish. It's pronounced either way, I think. And that is that letter there, 288. Ashkelon. That is going to end up being a Philistine city. They're going to have 5 cities. But we see here that the Habaru attack. The Habaru are stronger than us. May the king care for his lands. Over and over and over. You see this. Megiddo. This is just south of Mount Carmel here. city of Megiddo by day, by night, in the fields and chariots. But now the hostility to Habaru is severe in the land, so may the king, my lord, care for the land. They're pleading. May the king, my lord, and then the sun god is the Atum, that's at the end of his name. And he says, show concern for the land. The Habaru are stronger than us. And this is from Gezer. And may the king, my lord, please lead me from the power of the Habaru, lest the Habaru destroy us. And these letters come in a 10-year period, 5 to 10-year period, and then they stop. They don't get any more letters from Canaan. Did you have a question, David? I thought you had your hand. And this area here is farther up, but we see that the land that the Habaru captured from the king, they waged war with us on account of the king our Lord. As for the man whom you appointed over us, indeed we have guarded him. And so they're talking about what they gave him, the king of the Pharaoh. And remember when Joshua is in the valley of, I can't pronounce that. So if you look at this letter here, this is in that valley. And so this is when Joshua asked the Lord to lengthen the day so they could finish up the fight. And so there had never been a day before or a day after that. And this is, the city is included in the tribal area of Dan. And it's in one of the list of the Levitical cities. And this letter is from there talking about the Habaru have invaded it. Isn't Ramses mentioned as the Pharaoh of the Exodus? I have heard that all my life from Bible students. The word of Ramses is mentioned. And I want to show you something. Genesis 47:11. Joseph placed his father and brethren and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt and the best of the land and the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh commanded. It's not saying that Ramesses is the Pharaoh. Ramesses is a place. The area in Goshen, Ramses the Great, his father is Ramses the First. Ramses the First was a scribe under the last king of the 18th dynasty. He had no heirs. He ended up making the man Ramses the First a general, and then when he died, he let him be Pharaoh. And then Ramses the Second. Ramses the Great, guess where he grows up? Avaris. He grows up in Avaris at Ramses. That's why they took part of the reason they take the name. They are from that area where they see the residue of where the Hyksos lived. And he hates the Hyksos, but they're gone. The Hyksos are gone. But he grows up near Avaris, and he builds the city Pi Ramses, but that's long after the Israelites have gone. And so this is a place. Did they not set them taskmasters to affect their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh? It doesn't say it's Ramses. They built the treasure cities Pithom and Ramses. Now Ramses the Great rebuilds, we know that he rebuilds these cities, or rebuilds a city at Arbaris, and he calls it Pi Ramses after himself. Exodus 12:37, the children of Israel sojourned from, not Pharaoh Ramses, they went from Ramesses to Succoth. They weren't by Ramesses. They were at the place Ramses. So Ramses is not a pharaoh at that time. It is a place. So when you're teaching your young Bible students, make sure they understand that, because Ramses the Great, the second, is he comes up during the time of the judges. That's when he lives, during the time of the judges. So the times really won't match up no matter how you work that. That's a repeat slide. And these are repeat slides. Oh, okay. So Akhenaten, his son Tutankhamun, but Nefertiti is his stepmother. And then his wife is that name there that I'm not going to try to attempt to pronounce. Tutankhamun, after he dies, this man may have been his uncle, but he was the vizier to Akhenaten and Tutankhamun, and he was pretty old, and he becomes pharaoh for just a few years. Then there is this Hittite. When Tutankhamun dies, and he dies young, we know that. His widow, and the reason we know that is when they excavated his palace up in Hittite land, that she wrote him and said, I'm going to have to marry a general. There is no royal seed left in Egypt. I want to marry your son. Egyptians didn't marry outside. That Solomon's arrangement with the Pharaoh to marry Pharaoh's daughter is very unusual. Egyptians did not do that very often. So that he doesn't believe. So he sends an envoy down there, and yes, indeed, she is widowed, and it's true. So he has 5 sons. So he sends his youngest son down to Egypt, and he figures, he must figure that, it's a good alliance. And so he sends his son down. And let me see here if we got that. At this time, Horemheb has been general to these two. It's probably him that she has to marry. And so after the vizier dies, he's going to end up becoming a pharaoh. But right now he's still a general while she's alive. So his son, the convoy that goes down, gets massacred. Historians don't know, but they believe that he had something to do with it, that he got wind of it and then sent them up. And the Hittites are still powerful. He's the last great Hittite king, by the way. So he gets pretty upset. Well, Egypt had controlled some cities up in like northern Lebanon, and they had some soldiers there, and he goes down and captures those 2 cities, takes them over, and takes the Egyptian soldiers back to his palace at Hittiteville. I can't remember the name. Well, guess what? The soldiers that he's captured have disease and plague, or plague plural. And the Hittites are decimated. He dies, his sons die, and it decimates the Hittite kingdom. Now, riddle me this. Now, I'm just throwing this out, food for thought. If the Amarna Letters, which come in under these 2, and it lines up, the letters line up with the conquest, with the information that's in them. But the Egyptian dating right now does not line up to the time of the conquest. It's about 60 years off. But it's pretty close, but it's 60 years off. But wouldn't it make sense that God would take care of the Hittites for the Israelites as well. Because the Hittites are no longer a threat after all of these events have happened. And the Bible doesn't even need to explain that to us. God's taking care of it. What does God tell Joshua when they come to Jericho? I have given you this city. They didn't have to do much of anything, did they? They just had to do what God told them, and God caused the walls to fall down when they obeyed it. And if this is interesting because the Amarna Letters look just like the Joshua conquest. You're not going to have to worry about the Egyptians because they've been destroyed the 40 years before when they came out of Egypt. When they come to Jericho, Rahab the harlot tells the spies what? The people are afraid of what you did to who? Egypt. That was 40 years ago. Isn't it funny, the Vietnam War ended in the 70s, and basically we pulled out. It was kind of a, we lost the war, really. It didn't take 40 years for America to start trading again with Vietnam. We've been trading with Vietnam way before that time period. The people at Jericho were afraid of the Israelites of what happened 40 years ago. People tend to remember things, I think, a little bit better in the ancient world. At least these people that knew the Israelites were coming and the hand of God was with them. Now this fellow here is the one that wants to erase all memory of all of these kings. And then also when Ramses II comes up, he wants to erase all memory of the Hyksos. That's where he's from. He saw where they lived, and he didn't want to remember anything about the Hyksos. He doesn't include them in any history. Isn't it interesting that the Egyptians really want to scrub out anything to do with the Egyptians? Imagine being a general, and he's being written to from the land of Canaan, help us, help us, help us. And he does nothing about it. And he must have been in the background, maybe knowing something about it. But Egypt does not get back to the greatness that they had been until you get to Ramses II. And was he as great as he is called to be? He lived a long time. He's the longest reigning pharaoh. But he really, when you look at it, did not accomplish anything. Yeah, he fought the Hittites later on, and the Hittites were weaker, but the battle was a draw, and he came back and writes about how great of a battle it was for him, and he was really lucky to get out alive, and also the Hittites. I mean, it was basically the Keystone Cops, because they both were making such blunders. So he reestablished polytheism. He recycles the blocks for Akhenaten's monuments into temples. He dismantles the city of Amarna, reorganizes the military, moves the capital back to Thebes, erases all that from history. He has no heir. And then his heir ends up being Ramses I, who was his vizier and his scribe before that. And then Ramses only reigns about 2 years, then Seti I comes in, and then his son is Ramses the Great, who reigns for 67 years. Here we have the Heka. The Heka is the Egyptian symbol and word for scepter. It wasn't always that. Way before the Hyksos came, it was called the Wahs, W-A-H-S. And it had a sort of a goat head looking staff, and it had a prong at the bottom. But also all of a sudden you get this shepherd staff. Now the Bible tells us that the Egyptians loved shepherds or hated shepherds. They hated shepherds. They would not even eat with Joseph, the second ruler in the kingdom. His servants wouldn't even eat with him because it was an abomination to the Egyptian. But now, oh, and by the way, if you remember from last night, the shepherd staff, all the Hyksos kings, in their shepherd staff, in their names as a shepherd staff there to show that they were not a king, but more or less the head of the tribe. All of the Hyksos kings have Hebrew names. So Hyksos, H-Y-K, is the hick that's in Heka. It means shepherd king. Now, there are people out there saying, no, it means foreign kings, because Manetho said that's what it meant. Josephus said, no, it means shepherd kings. So there was an argument way back when. And so people today don't want us to think it could be the Hyksos, that could be the Israelites. The scepter, Hek, comes from the Hek in Hyksos. And you see it in the writings on those walls. The Heka, and you know it's golden, and it's got blue stripes on it. I don't know if I have a picture of it up on it. I don't. That's okay. It's okay. So the Heka, you saw one over there. It's a shepherd's staff. And guess who starts using these things? Tutankhamun used one. Akhenaten used one. And you know what they're used for? It means it signifies their royal power. But what they're used for is to put down into the grain coffers. And the markings on there show you how full the grain coffers are, and to make sure that there's no rocks in the bottom. And then they're pulled out, a servant puts the lid on, the Pharaoh then seals that grain cylinder, knowing that that is full, and that he has certified that that is full. Who did that when Jacob and his family came? It was Joseph. You think Joseph may have come up with a shepherd's staff to come up with that semblance of order? What did Pharaoh give Joseph? His signet ring. Why did he get the signet ring? Well, he was in charge of the grain, and if that's the way it was done, he would have needed a signet ring if he was the one that was going to ensure that the coffers were at the proper fill. Right? That piece of information to me is just, that's mind-boggling. I bought an Egyptian hieroglyph dictionary, and why I bought it, I don't know. But it was one of those reading material things that you have it around and kind of flip through, and I was reading about the Heka. And it was so obvious to me that this has something to do with Joseph. And I was reading the definition, and then down at the footnote, the author puts, and don't think that this could have anything to do with Joseph. Evidently she did, because she had to write that in her book. And then she says, because the dates are off. And I think that was written for the 2006 readjustment. Dates off or not, there are some major issues. Because if you look at the 17th dynasty, well, not the 17th, if you look at the 14th, 13th dynasties, and the 16th dynasties, and if you just go on Wikipedia and look at them, they show the pharaohs, but they don't have any reign dates, because they don't know. But they're filling up this time without any dates. It's pretty peculiar, if you ask me.